Good afternoon and welcome to the third episode of my mental health series, Wallflower Findings. My name is Arazim and it is currently Sunday afternoon, October 20th. And this week I made the mistake of attempting to do this episode without writing it down first. Turns out it's a lot harder that way, especially when my thoughts are all over the place and I need some sense of organization. So I caved and wrote it down this weekend, and now I feel a lot better. But anyway, for those of you who don't know me, it's really something ironic that I'm spending some of my first episodes talking about attention, because most of my life I have been known to be impulsive, distracted easily, and for my inability to multitask. Some of which is honestly still a little true, but it's definitely something that I work towards and progress on every day. If you don't know me, I post a lot of gym progress pictures on social media, and my guess is that most people probably assume that I like working out for the results or for what you see in my pictures. Truth is, I decided to start working out for two reasons. One of those reasons I've already kind of mentioned in previous episodes is because since I was having trouble fighting the battles in my mind, I started working on gaining physical strength, hoping that same strength would transfer to my mindset. Turns out it did. But that's besides the point. Second reason is I had actually come to realize that at the root of my impulsiveness, ease of distraction, and being able to multitask, it all centered around my incredible lack of discipline. And I'm talking about most areas of my life. So after finally deciding to turn my life around, having to unlearn everything I had known all my life, and starting from scratch, the easiest way I knew how to begin teaching myself discipline was through physical training and nutrition, because my thought was, if it's true that every decision that we make matters, the easiest way of testing the validity of that statement would be through disciplining my nutrition, and then later feeling the changes in my health and seeing the effects in my body that it has on my body with my own eyes. At the same time, I'd also promised myself that I needed to stop depending on others. I had depended on others my entire life, so I chose to do this research on my own. And just so happens that just around the time that I made this decision to change my nutrition, I met a friend who's a bodybuilder and actually ended up helping me by giving me small tips of changes that I could make in my diet that honestly made a huge difference and helped solidify the theory that all the small details are the ones that matter most. So time passed, and once I realized that this was all real and true, I knew that there was no telling what I or anybody really is capable of achieving outside as much as within your own body through disciplining your mindset and through that disciplining your actions. So, did you know that out of a panel of thousands of surveys, people reported their level of focus being the highest by far while having sex? Now that I've got your attention again, the second highest, far from that, was while exercising, and lagging behind that was while talking with someone, followed by playing. In contrast, mind wandering happened the most while working, using a home computer, or commuting. And by looking at these results more closely, the difference then in our level of focus at any given point is determined by the amount of pleasure we experience while performing a certain task. This might sound a little bit obvious, so the more we like something, the more focused we are overall. But then, why is it that according to research done by Harvard University, only 20% of people experience periods throughout the day where they find themselves fully absorbed in what they're doing? Again, that's only periods throughout the day, while another 15% of people never feel this way on a given workday. So the reason I'm spending 2 episodes on attention alone is because 95% of all the success and motivational books I've read all boil down to what you're doing in your daily routine at a microscopic level. What I mean by that is that according to a majority of these books and lectures, the key to personal success of any kind really is directly correlated with the summation of all the tiny decisions we make in our everyday lives. So then if we find ourselves in the position of needing to be distracted on a regular basis, either because, and again, this is all because I've been there, because we're too focused on the past, or we're ignoring our problems and or our emotions. We're unsatisfied with our current jobs or relationships. We're maybe carrying a lot on our plate. We have a lot of responsibility that maybe doesn't even belong to us. Or maybe we're choosing to just settle, even though deep down inside we're either hurting or we just feel that something is missing. So if any of these things sound familiar, you need to understand that this is the most effective way of completely killing your own chances of moving forward or of opening doors to new opportunities. And all because you're too focused on everything that isn't here and now. Again, this is only because I've been there. Even more, the truth is everyone experiences these things at one point. Just most of us, for many reasons, feel obligated to keep it to ourselves, or we make ourselves believe that we shouldn't feel this way, so we hide, not knowing we're shutting ourselves down in the process. So what is it about us humans that make it so easy for us to completely ignore our own instincts? Instincts, by the way, that have only been upgraded throughout our evolution for the exact purpose of guiding us forward. This very instinct, whose original and primitive purpose was to increase our chances of survival, now has a much more powerful and much bigger purpose, and that's to ignite and then free the passion that's within us. So have you ever heard the phrase, people always ask me if I'm married, making enough money, have a house, or when I'm going to have kids, but no one ever stops to ask if I'm happy? I know because I've seen it on Facebook a few times, but this is real. And the reason this question is asked, especially by our older family members, is because most of them grew up being taught that the key to happiness is living this sort of linear life. So you couldn't possibly be successful or happy if your adult life didn't fall within one of these categories. So this very linear way of thinking is actually also reflected in how the educational system is structured. We're all taught much of the same classes for a very long time, and we're all expected to get very similar results out of it. And while this way of thinking worked well back in the industrial period when there was an extremely high demand for labor and process work, this made total sense then, because if we're all taught the same things, we're likely to perform the task or the process the same way all around, which is exactly what one would expect from working in a factory. So again, even though this served the purpose perfectly back then, we no longer live in that day and age. If you recall, on my very first episode, I talked about a psychiatrist and his team's project of studying 83,000 brain scans from 93 different countries. The same team, which concluded that the single most important lesson of their project was realizing that treatment for troubled brains needed to be personalized with every case based on an individual brain scan. And that we should no longer base treatments off symptoms alone, because the cause and the root of many of these diseases they encountered were far from anything that could be seen or heard from the outside. And this, again, is because our brains are wired differently from within, depending on both our biological makeup and our history. This is actually very similar to education. So first of all, we no longer live in an age where learning a process is what's going to drive us forward. Today, and in a complex world where almost everyone has access to the same information, new value arises from originality and putting together ideas in novel ways, and from smart questions that open up untapped potential. In order to spark these creative insights, though, we must learn how to join ideas in a useful and fresh way. Education then should no longer revolve around what we learn or the facts, rather than how to think and how we learn. It's time to accept the fact that all of us can no longer learn the same way, and continuing to do so, especially for an extended period of time, not only hinders our overall education, but I believe it's a huge prerequisite of depression and anxiety at an early age. Especially having to deal with an overload of information, students are likely going to forget a week or so after the test, much like I did. As a matter of fact, cognitive science rules that overloading attention shrinks mental control. Crucial. The thing is, though, the system has been in place for a long time, and very little people find it necessary to change a structure that has existed for so long. But I really don't need to provide a lengthy or really any kind of explanation of how just because something has existed a certain way for so long does not make it right, especially with how we live today. Witness the women's rights and the civil rights movements. Okay. I may have gone on a slight tangent there, but it all ties together, I swear. So now that we have a fairly firm grasp on why our attention is important, why it's crucial, I'm going to now help you understand the structure of our attention and how we can manipulate it or really gain control of it and make it work for us with whatever our goal is or whatever we hope to accomplish. So it's easiest to start off with the two main ways we become distracted. So through sensory information and emotions. Sensory distractions are pretty easy. So reading posters around the wall of a classroom when you're bored, the moment you notice your tongue against your upper palate, or feeling your stomach growl. Just one of an endless wave of incoming stimuli your brain learns to filter out from a long stream of background noises, shapes, colors, smells, tastes, etc. The scarier one, and the one that just so happened to personally kick my ass more times than not, are emotionally loaded signals. Very simply, if you hear your name being said in the background as you're sitting in a coffee shop, no matter what you may have been doing there previously, your attention immediately gravitates towards the conversation where you heard your name. By far, the biggest challenge of focus is the emotional turmoil we face in our lives. Our emotions kind of tend to have a mind of their own. That's where you get that saying. Huge examples such as a divorce or breakup, losing someone that's close to you, any kind of abuse, and more, all of which disrupts our thought process on a continuing basis. And we need to understand that we feel these things for a good reason, and they're necessary. And that is to get us to think through what's upsetting us. So the problem comes in not by feeling these emotions, but by either deliberately or maybe worse, unconsciously choosing to ignore them or dismissing their validity. This, I learned, is the worst thing you can do, because this is exactly the reason why we end up obsessing over the same loop of worry, maybe even for years. What we fail to realize is that in order to stop this seemingly never-ending loop, we need to reflect on the reason of our worries and vocalize them, either to ourselves or even better to somebody else, in order to reach an insight or a revelation that will allow us to process these emotions and then let them go eventually, again, depending on the situation. Very simply, your focus is worse off the more it gets disrupted. Since focus demands we tune out our emotional distractions, our neural wiring for selective attention includes that for inhibiting emotion, meaning that those who focus best are better at managing their emotions and vice versa. So again, the stronger our selective attention, the more powerfully we can stay absorbed in what we've chosen to do. However, if instead of concentration we distract ourselves with every little thing out there, synchrony vanishes. The same drop in synchrony that causes people to be diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. So going even further, deep and critical thinking and analyzing demands sustaining a focused mind, and the more distracted we are, the more shallow our reflections, likewise the shorter our reflections, and the more trivial and kind of pointless they're likely to be. Before you know it, you could find yourself making many of your decisions unconsciously as a result of all the distractions. So, in summary, just by being aware of the two main forms of distraction, sensory and emotional, and how they affect us, we're now in a better position to think about how our own distractions are affecting what we do every day, and can then begin taking the steps to work on confronting these emotions that we may have once dismissed. So this actually leads into how our attention is structured and how it works. Have you ever struggled to find a solution to a problem you've had for maybe days, months, or even longer? And